Hey everyone, before we dive into today's brutal and epic HFY story, make sure to hit that like button if you love savage revenge arcs, and subscribe for more human and apex predator domination tales. Drop a comment below telling me what apex beast you would bond with in an alien galaxy. Would it be a dire wolf, a snow lion, or something even deadlier? Now let's begin. Chains bit into his wrists with every jolt of the transport crawler. Thick steel links rattled as the slavers dragged him out onto the jagged rocks of the barren moon. Cold winds scraped across his bloodied skin. The warriors of his unit had always mocked the idea of cold in space environments, but here it felt like shards of glass slicing his lungs. He staggered, arms wrenched above his head, feeling the familiar taste of iron drip from his split lip onto his tongue. "Move, human filth," growled the nearest slaver. Its chitinous face split to reveal serrated yellow teeth as it shoved him forward with an electroprod. The device crackled and pain stabbed into his spine, forcing his knees to buckle. He caught himself with a strained groan, refusing to kneel fully. The slaver cackled at his defiance, clicking its mandibles in amusement. They dragged him across the rocky clearing into the main encampment, rusted cages stacked atop each other, alien prisoners whimpering behind plasma bars. He barely registered them. His eyes searched frantically until he found what he feared most. There, in a reinforced energy cage 10 meters away, lay a massive beast covered in sleek gray-black fur. Muscles rippled beneath the predator's shoulders even as it lay unconscious, breathing shallowly. Thick steel cuffs locked its paws together, with a neural sedative rig drilled into its broad neck. It looked like a wolf in shape but far larger, nearly the size of a horse, with jaws wide enough to snap a man in half and eyes that, when open, burned with intelligent amber fire. Seeing it like this, unmoving, unleashed a fresh surge of rage through his veins. He tried to lunge forward, only for his captor to yank the chains hard, jerking him back so forcefully he slammed onto the cold stone ground. His ribs shrieked in protest. For a moment his vision swam and he coughed blood into the dust. "Pathetic," said another slaver, stepping forward. This one wore officer insignia on his armored harness, signifying rank among the Zishari slaver clans. Its 8 black eyes glittered with amusement. "Humans, always thinking their pets, will save them. This creature will fetch a fine price in the fighting pits. Or perhaps its pelt would make a glorious rug in my personal den." The warrior forced himself onto his knees. His vision blurred with tears of pain, but he kept his gaze locked on the predator in its cage. "Don't you touch him," he rasped, every syllable scraping through swollen vocal cords. The Zishari officer tilted its head and flicked its clawed hand. Another slaver approached the predator's cage, activating the electroprod. Blue arcs sparked across the bars before lancing into the beast's side. Even sedated, its massive body convulsed in agony. A low, guttural whine escaped its throat. Its eyelids fluttered, revealing slivers of molten amber. Then its head drooped once more, trapped in suffocating sedation. "Stop!" the human shouted, voice cracking with fury and grief. He lurched forward, but the slavers kicked him down again, boots smashing into his ribs and shoulder until he collapsed fully, gasping for breath. His mind screamed at him to rise, to fight, to rip out their alien throats with his bare hands if needed, but his body no longer obeyed. The Zishari officer crouched beside him, claw tapping rhythmically on the warrior's cheek. "You will watch as we flay this beast alive," it whispered, rancid breath washing over him. "And when you have nothing left to love, we will harvest your organs for the biotech markets." He closed his eyes. Darkness pressed at the edges of his mind, but he clung to consciousness. He forced his battered lungs to draw in another freezing breath, ignoring the agony it brought. His thoughts flickered to the past, to the day he first found the predator. It had been a cub then, half dead from a plasma burn, growling weakly in the shadows of a derelict colony. Its mother's corpse lay nearby, already being picked apart by carrion drones. Most men would have shot it for safety. But he saw the fire in its eyes, a survivor's fire, one that mirrored his own after crawling out of the hellhole jungles of Sigma 4. He carried it out, fed it, nursed it back to health. Over years of harsh hunts and silent patrols, the two became one, bonded not through command or dominance but loyalty earned in blood and struggle. A boot slammed into his chest, snapping him back to the freezing present. He felt a rib crack under the blow. Pain exploded like lightning across his torso, but he refused to scream. Slavers laughed around him, their guttural cackles echoing off metal cages and rocky spires. The Zishari officer turned away, flicking its claw in dismissal. "Chain him to the post. Let him watch the creature's fate until it's time for his dissection. They dragged him to a steel pole embedded into the rocky ground, chaining his arms above his head until he hung by strained shoulders, feet barely touching the dirt. Every breath burned. Blood dripped from his split knuckles, pooling beneath him in slow, rhythmic drops. A distant memory of sunlight filtering through golden fur as his predator napped by the river flickered in his mind. The quiet warmth of its massive head resting on his lap. The silent understanding between man and beast. "Wake up," he whispered hoarsely, eyes locked on the unconscious predator as slavers began assembling tools for extraction. His voice trembled with exhaustion and agony, but his resolve burned hotter than any pain. "Wake up, don't leave me here alone." A breeze whispered across the barren plain, carrying the scent of blood and metal. His predator's ears twitched once, so slight it might have been imagined. Its breathing quickened, chest rising and falling in uneven surges. Its nostrils flared, tasting the wind, tasting the blood. For a single instant, its amber eyes fluttered open a fraction, pupils slitting into razor-thin lines. No slaver noticed. But the human warrior did. And for the first time since his capture, he allowed a thin, blood-crusted smile to crack his broken lips. They thought him helpless. They thought his predator was just another beast to break and cage. But they did not understand the ancient truth of predator and human. One never left the other behind. Even if it meant tearing the stars themselves apart to reunite. He closed his eyes, leaning against the rough steel of the post as darkness pressed in again. Somewhere deep in his chest, beneath shattered ribs and clotted bruises, his heartbeat steadied into a quiet, unbreakable rhythm of faith. They would all die screaming before this ended. A scream tore through the frigid dawn as the electroprod cracked against his back. The pain blinded him, searing straight into his spine until he thought he might vomit from the agony. Another blow landed across his ribs, tearing open old bruises and sending fresh blood dripping down his sides. He clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached, refusing to give them the pleasure of hearing him scream again. "Stand up, human," one slaver sneered. Its segmented limbs shifted restlessly as it loomed over him. "Show us your so-called warrior pride." He could barely move. His knees wobbled as he tried to rise, chains rattling overhead. The Zishari officer stood nearby, arms folded across armored plates that shimmered in dull silver under the rising light. 8 black eyes watched him with the cold indifference of a spider studying trapped prey. "You humans break so easily," the officer said. Its voice was almost gentle. "Your bones are like glass. Your flesh rips apart with such minimal force. Fascinating how your species survived long enough to reach the stars." He tasted blood on his tongue as he finally straightened his back. The wind whipped across his torn skin, burning the raw welts left by the prod. Through the haze of pain, he forced his gaze to the predator's cage. His breathing had changed. The shallow, sedated rhythm was gone. Now its massive chest heaved with deeper, ragged breaths. Its ears twitched at every noise, every shout, every crack of the electroprod against his body. Its eyes remained closed, but he could see them moving beneath the lids, tracking vibrations and scent trails. The slavers noticed nothing. They were too busy enjoying their spectacle. 2 more gathered around him, jeering and spitting insults in their guttural language as they traded off the electroprod to take turns. Each blow rattled through his frame, sending white-hot lightning down his nerves. He felt his knees give way again, but they pulled him upright, eager for another strike. "Enough," the Zishari officer finally said with quiet amusement. "He will die before the extraction teams arrive if you continue. Let him hang." But before that, it turned to face the predator's cage, flicking a clawed hand at the waiting slaver. "Stimulate the creature again. I want it fully conscious when we begin skinning." The slaver grinned, mandibles clacking in anticipation. It stepped toward the cage, raising the electroprod. Inside, the predator's ears pinned back. Its upper lip curled in a silent snarl. A deep, chest-rumbling growl vibrated through the metal floor, so low it was almost inaudible. The slaver hesitated, glancing at the officer. "Do it," the officer snapped. The prod connected with the predator's shoulder. Instantly its body convulsed, muscles rippling under sleek fur as blue sparks danced across its hide. Its eyes flew open, blazing molten amber. Foam sprayed from its jaws as it threw its head back, fangs bared in a silent scream of rage and pain. The human warrior's chest seized. Every instinct screamed to run to it, to rip open the cage with his bare hands if necessary, but chains bit deep into his wrists. The predator's eyes locked onto his. Between flashes of burning pain, It saw him, bloodied, battered, half-crucified against the post, and something ancient and savage ignited within its gaze. Sedation levels dropping rapidly, a slaver technician muttered from a nearby console. Its fingers danced over the controls. Neural inhibitors at 30%. Attempting recalibration. Do it quickly, the officer ordered, voice tight for the first time. The technician's claws scrambled at the panel, increasing the sedative flow. The predator's muscles seized again, and a fresh snarl tore from its chest. It slammed its massive paw against the cage bars. Steel groaned. The entire frame shook, rattling bolts from welded plates. Sparks cascaded down as circuits shorted under the sudden kinetic impact. Reinforce the inhibitors, the technician barked in panic. The cage is not rated for this strength. Inside the predator's mind, pain and fury blurred into a singular primal focus. It felt the agony burning along its nerves, tasted blood where its tongue pressed against its own teeth, heard the slavers shouting outside the bars. But none of that mattered. The only thing that existed was its human. Its alpha. Its pack. And its pack was being hurt. It lunged again, jaws clamping around the steel bars. Teeth capable of puncturing armored synth hide dug into metal. The alloy bent with a sickening screech. Sparks erupted from severed power conduits, showering its fur with burning embers. The smell of scorched hair filled the air as blue energy flared around its muzzle. Its lips peeled back from massive canines, drool sizzling against live wires. Shut it down, the officer roared. Override the cage power and sedative feed. We can't, the technician shrieked, mandibles flaring wide. It's overriding the neural inhibitors. Sedative reservoirs are drained. The predator slammed its massive body against the bars again. Metal crumpled inward. A final surge of hydraulic strength ripped the door from its housing. With a deafening roar, it leapt out, landing with enough force to crack the stone floor beneath its paws. For a heartbeat, the slavers froze, staring at the hulking beast now free before them. Then chaos erupted. Plasma rifles snapped to aim. Blades flicked out from armored wrists. But the predator was already moving. It lunged forward, closing the distance to the first slaver before its finger even tightened on the trigger. Its jaws snapped shut around the alien's throat, severing spine and windpipe in a single motion. Blood sprayed across the rusted cages as the corpse fell limp. The predator barely paused to shake the body free before pivoting toward the next. The warrior watched, chained to the post, as his predator unleashed hell upon the slavers. Each movement was precise, lethal, an execution honed by years of hunting and silent communication with its human. One slaver managed to fire a plasma bolt into its flank. The beast roared in pain and fury, twisted mid-lunge, and tore the alien's arm clean from its socket. The creature's scream ended abruptly as massive jaws crushed its skull with a wet, crunching snap. The Zishari officer stepped back, fumbling at its hip for a concealed energy pistol. Its mandibles trembled as it aimed at the predator's eye. But before it could fire, the beast moved. Faster than thought, it leapt. Its massive paw slammed into the officer's chest, driving it to the ground. Steel claws punctured through armor plates like cardboard, impaling the slaver to the rocky floor. The predator's jaws closed around its head, and with a single savage twist, it tore the alien's face from its skull. Blood and brain matter splattered across the dusty ground. The predator stood over the mangled corpse, panting heavily, its thick fur slick with gore and burn marks. Its golden eyes locked onto the only figure that mattered. The human warrior. It stepped over the twitching body, moving with surprising gentleness for something that moments before had ripped armored aliens apart like paper. Its massive head pressed against his chest, rumbling a deep, comforting growl as it sniffed at his wounds. Hot tears blurred his vision. He pressed his forehead to its muzzle, breathing in the scent of burnt fur and fresh blood. "Good boy," he whispered hoarsely, voice trembling with relief and unbreakable love. "Good boy." Behind them, the few remaining slavers fled in terror, their screams echoing into the morning sky. The predator ignored them, focusing only on the chains binding its human. It closed massive jaws around the steel links and bit down. Sparks erupted as the metal snapped apart like brittle bone. The warrior sagged forward into the predator's thick fur, clinging to it with blood-slick hands. Together they stood amidst the corpses, surrounded by the stench of death and burning metal. The predator rumbled again, a low sound vibrating through its massive chest, as if asking a silent question. His eyes hardened as he raised his gaze to the horizon, where slaver transports were already fleeing into orbit. Each breath sent fresh waves of agony through his broken ribs, but he welcomed the pain. It reminded him he was alive. That they were both alive. "We're not done," he said, voice quiet and lethal. "We're just getting started." The predator's ears twitched forward, teeth bared in silent agreement. Together, bathed in dawnlight and the blood of their enemies, they turned toward the exit of the camp, ready to begin the slaughter of every slaver ring in the galaxy. The metal door buckled under the predator's first impact. Its massive shoulder slammed into the reinforced seam again and again, each strike rattling through the warrior's bones like distant thunder. Sparks flickered around the edges of the bent frame as the predator tore at the weakened lock with claws meant for tearing armored prey limb from limb. A final slam split the top hinge free, and the heavy barrier crashed inward with a scream of tortured steel. The stale air of the command chamber rolled out to meet them, thick with the scent of ozone and fear. Inside, the last of the Zishari officers stood in a semicircle around a glowing tactical table, claws flicking across shifting holograms as they shouted commands to retreating units elsewhere on the moon. The instant the door fell, their eyes turned as one to the silhouette in the broken doorway, a human warrior draped in blood and torn cloth, leaning against a beast whose shoulders brushed the frame on either side. No words passed between man and predator. The warrior took one breath, forced his battered lungs to hold it steady, then stepped forward with the predator moving at his side, each footfall echoing like a countdown to slaughter. The first officer, braver than the rest or simply more foolish, lunged for a plasma sidearm at its hip. The predator launched forward so fast the warrior barely tracked it, a streak of dark fur and bone-crushing muscle that smashed the officer onto the tactical table. Metal supports bent under the impact. The officer's shriek cut short as jaws clamped down over its throat, crunching cartilage and plating in a single heartbeat. The others scattered, drawing weapons, ducking behind crates of munitions stacked near the wall. Plasma bolts stitched the air, sizzling through smoke and shadows. The warrior dropped to one knee and braced the stolen rifle on his forearm. Each pull of the trigger sent fresh pain searing through his ribs, but each shot found its mark: shoulder, leg, throat. Aliens fell screaming or dropped their weapons and scrambled back into corners now painted in their own dark blood. He forced himself up and moved deeper into the chamber, boots slipping in the growing pools on the steel floor. A corner of his mind registered how the predator moved beside him, always half a step ahead, tearing into threats before they could take aim. The beast's snarls reverberated through the control deck like thunder rolling over broken plains. One officer made it to a side console, fingers slamming keys in desperation. The warrior caught the glow of a distress beacon flaring on the screen. Coordinates, fleet signals, a call for reinforcements from another Zishari ring hidden deep in the outer sectors. He lurched forward, ribs stabbing daggers of pain through his chest, and smashed the butt of his rifle into the console. Sparks erupted. He drove the stock down again and again until the display guttered out in flickering ruin. The last officer bolted for a side exit, claws scraping frantically at the access panel. The door stuttered half open before the predator barreled across the chamber and pinned the Zishari against the frame. The officer screeched, mandibles flaring as massive jaws clamped over its chest. Bone cracked. The beast pulled back, tearing the alien free in two mangled halves that hit the floor with a wet slap. Silence reclaimed the chamber, broken only by the predator's low, rumbling breaths and the drip of blood onto scorched decking. The warrior leaned against the shattered tactical table, forcing air into battered lungs. His gaze drifted to the predator, which turned and padded back to him, fur matted with blood that wasn't its own. He dropped the useless rifle and reached out with one shaking hand, fingers tangling in the creature's thick ruff. It pressed its broad skull against his stomach, careful not to touch the raw welts across his ribs. For a moment he let himself sag against it, feeling the steady rise and fall of its breath, the heat radiating through layers of sweat and grime. They were alive. For now. He lifted his head and scanned the ruined command chamber. Broken bodies lay draped over consoles. A flickering comm array still spat out fragments of garbled orders to ships that would never come. Outside the open hatch, he could see the distant glow of the slaver compound's main gate, barricades abandoned, sentry towers silent. The surviving Zishari had fled into the hills or off-world, scattering like roaches before flame. One by one he shut down the consoles they hadn't smashed, cutting power to the slave pens they hadn't reached yet. He imagined the other cages opening, more prisoners stepping out into cold dawnlight, blinking in freedom they'd thought lost forever. Somewhere in that dark tide of escapees, a spark would spread, word of a lone human and his monstrous companion tearing through a fortress no one believed could be breached. The predator shifted its weight, brushing its massive shoulder against him in quiet reminder that this wasn't finished. He looked down at the amber eyes locked onto his with a question unspoken but clear as blood on steel. What now? His cracked lips pulled into something close to a grin. He pressed his brow to the beast for a heartbeat, grounding himself in the warmth there, the steady thrum of life that no cage or sedative could ever break. We burn it all, he said. The words came out ragged but ironclad. No more cages. No more chains. No more of them. The predator's tail lashed once behind it, massive fangs flashing as it rumbled its approval. Together they stepped back through the broken doorway, leaving behind the corpses and flickering lights. The corridors beyond lay open, a maze of cold steel and shadow leading to the surface. The warrior's footsteps dragged a little heavier now, every muscle screaming for rest, but the beast kept close enough that his shoulder brushed warm fur every few paces. It would hold him up if he fell. He would stand until they were finished. Outside, the barren rocks waited under a bruised sky. Distant fires marked where slave pens now lay in ruin. He pictured those flames spreading, reaching every hidden burrow where Zishari slavers huddled and whispered that humans were soft prey. He pictured the terror on their faces when the rumor spread that a man and his predator were coming for them next. One step at a time. One ring at a time. Until the last chain shattered. He paused at the threshold as the cold wind knifed through the torn fabric on his back. His predator pressed its muzzle against his hand, its breathing steady and calm despite the burns and bullet furrows hidden under its coat. Together they turned toward the pale horizon where the stars still waited behind dawn's dying shadows. He squeezed a handful of fur and felt the beast lean into him, a silent promise made flesh and fawn. Ahead lay the long hunt. Wind howled across the barren moon, lifting curls of ash from burning wreckage. The warrior stood at the edge of the blasted ridge overlooking what remained of the slaver compound. Flames guttered in twisted metal frames where cages once stood stacked atop each other. Black smoke billowed into the pale sky, carrying with it the stench of charred steel, scorched blood, and final justice. The predator sat beside him, its thick fur rippling in the cold updraft. Its muzzle dripped with dark streaks of blood, and burned scars smoldered along its flank where plasma bolts had grazed too close to bone. Yet its breathing remained steady, ears flicking at each distant sound, its amber eyes locked on the horizon as though already scanning for their next hunt. He reached down and pressed his palm to the thick ruff behind its skull. It tilted its massive head into his touch, rumbling softly in its chest. The sound vibrated through his bones like the purr of a great engine coming to life. It was comfort, reassurance, and an unbreakable promise all in one. "We're not done," he murmured, voice hoarse from smoke and screaming. The predator let out a single huff of breath, as if to say it had never believed otherwise. He turned back toward the burning compound. Survivors streamed out through shattered gates, thin, limping silhouettes of alien prisoners, fur matted or scales dulled with starvation. Some stared at him in silent awe, others dropped to their knees, trembling under the memory of Zishari rule. The warrior raised one bruised and bloodied hand. They flinched as if expecting a blow. Instead, he gestured toward the open plains beyond the slave yard. "Go," he rasped. "Run far. Find others. Tell them slavers die screaming now." An insectoid alien with shattered wing casings glanced at the predator, then at him, and something like hope flickered in its faceted eyes. Without a word, it turned and limped after the others, disappearing into the early dawn. He felt his knees tremble beneath him. Each ragged breath scraped through cracked ribs and burned in his chest, but the pain only carved deeper clarity into his mind. Every broken bone, every bleeding cut reminded him that he was still alive, and that survival itself was a weapon they had never accounted for. The predator rose and pressed its shoulder against his thigh, steadying him when his balance wavered. He let his hand drift along the beast's broad neck, feeling the heat of fresh wounds beneath his fingers. Its ears flicked back, then forward again, a silent dismissal of pain. "You saved me," he whispered, leaning close until his forehead rested against its massive brow. Its golden eyes half closed as it let out a sigh that smelled of blood and scorched metal. "You always save me." In that quiet, something shifted inside him. The soldier who had come to this moon was dead. Beaten, chained, nearly flayed before an audience of chittering monsters. But the man standing here now was something different. Something sharper, older, a primal truth reborn through agony and loyalty. He turned his gaze to the rising sun cresting the lunar ridgeline, its light striking his blood-slick skin and catching in the predator's amber eyes. For a moment they stood in silence, two silhouettes framed against the smoldering horizon. Man and beast, scarred and unbroken, forged together in the crucible of chains and slaughter. His hand curled tighter into the predator's fur as he spoke the vow that had been building in his chest since the first whip cracked against his back. We end them all. The predator lifted its head and let out a deep, rolling growl that reverberated across the ridge, echoing off silent cages and distant metal towers. It was not a roar of fury. It was a promise of annihilation. He moved with slow purpose down the slope toward the gutted command module where Zishari corpses lay twisted in shattered armor. Smoke drifted from the ruined consoles, still glowing with flickering data streams and partially decrypted fleet manifests. He stepped over a severed limb and crouched beside a broken tactical terminal, wiping blood from its cracked interface. With a few experimental keystrokes, the flickering screen burst into jagged life, spitting out lines of alien script across fractured glass. The predator moved behind him, its bulk casting a protective shadow over his hunched form. He scanned the data fragments, coordinates, shipping lanes, encryption keys, clan hierarchies. A full network of Zishari slaver operations across 6 sectors flickered before his eyes. "Look at them," he said softly, half to himself and half to the beast standing guard at his back. "They thought we were nothing. Just another prisoner. Just another animal to chain." The predator let out a low rumble vibrating through his bones, rattling his teeth with silent approval. He transferred the data to a portable drive and slipped it into the shredded strap across his chest. Every movement tore fresh agony through his side, but he clenched his jaw against the pain. Pain was fuel. Pain was clarity. He rose unsteadily to his feet. The predator pressed against him again, its muzzle brushing his shoulder in quiet reassurance. Blood dripped from its fangs onto the dust, each crimson drop a promise that no chain would hold them again. He limped back out onto the ridge. Dawn spread across the moon like a wound blooming open, revealing blackened wreckage and fleeing slaver transports in the upper atmosphere. He watched their contrails fade into the cold sky, and a quiet, feral smile curved his broken lips. "They'll warn the others," he murmured, resting a hand on the predator's massive head. "Good. Let them fear what's coming." The predator's amber eyes locked onto his, filled with silent understanding. It opened its jaws and let out a low, rolling snarl that carried across the plains like a distant thunderstorm. Birds hidden in rocky outcrops scattered into the morning sky, their wings beating against the rising wind. He turned away from the burning camp and began walking toward the distant landing pads where silent shuttles awaited, each step leaving bloody footprints in the lunar dust. The predator moved beside him, fur brushing his torn uniform with each stride. Together they descended into the valley, leaving behind smoke and ash, stepping into the pale new day as a single unbreakable shadow. Each step carried his vow forward, every breath stitching his purpose into unbreakable steel. No more cages. No more chains. No more slavers. They would become a whispered terror in the Zishari dark. A myth carried from one hunted world to the next, the man who could not be broken, and the beast who tore through steel and bone to stand at his side. And as they walked into the sunrise, the predator let out one final roar, a cry that shook the silent ridges, echoing into the dawning sky with a promise of vengeance that would not end until the last slaver screamed its final breath. The shuttle thrummed beneath his boots as its old engines roared to life. He leaned against the console, feeling the vibration rattle through his fractured ribs. The cockpit smelled of burnt wiring and old blood, but it was fueled and space-worthy, more than enough. The predator crouched by the entry ramp, shoulders brushing both walls, its amber eyes locked on him with silent focus. Its muzzle dripped faint trails of blood onto the metal floor, each drop an unspoken reminder of the slaughter they left behind. He keyed the ignition and flicked a cracked screen to navigation mode. Lines of coordinates blinked to life, one after the other, each marking Zishari outposts, black market docks and hidden slave rings scattered across 6 sectors. He felt a dark, quiet satisfaction settle deep in his chest as he scanned the data. For the first time in weeks, his breath came without shaking. "We'll need supplies," he said softly, his voice raw. "Weapons, armor, and a ship that can cross the rift sectors without flagging security grids." The predator huffed, ears flicking forward, as if to say, "Then let's begin." Its tail thumped once against the metal ramp, rattling loose bolts. He keyed the engines for launch. Outside the viewport, the charred slave compound shrank below them, embers glowing like dying stars across the dark rock plains. He let the moment burn itself into his memory, every scream, every blood trail, every chain now shattered. As the shuttle punched through the thin upper atmosphere, the blackness of space swallowed them whole. He felt the predator press its massive head against his shoulder, warm and steady. The silent vow passed between them again, deeper now, unbreakable. No more cages. No more chains. No mercy. Only the hunt. He reached out and flicked the next set of coordinates onto the main display, watching the symbols align into a path of future slaughter. His lips cracked into a tired, savage smile. Let's go kill them all. The predator rumbled low in agreement, amber eyes gleaming with reflected starlight as the shuttle surged into the void, leaving behind the ashes of their first vengeance and heading toward the next world in need of liberation, and the slavers in need of death.